Somewhere deep in the Cordillera Mountains of northern Luzon, inside a cave that smells of pine, resin, and cold stone, a body sits upright, knees pulled to the chest, hands folded, eyes closed since before the pharaohs ever wrapped their first body in linen. You pass a torch across the face, and something happens that you don't expect. The face looks back. Now hold that image. Because by the end of this, that face will mean something completely different to you. Most people carry a mental map of ancient civilization. Egypt sits near the top, Greece somewhere below it, Mesopotamia to the left. The Philippines doesn't appear on that map at all, and that absence tells you more about the map makers than it does about the land. The Kabayan mummies of Benguet province have been dated by researchers to somewhere between 3,000 and 2,000 years before the Common Era. Some estimates push further back. Egypt's most famous mummies, the carefully wrapped, mask-covered bodies of the New Kingdom pharaohs, come from roughly 1,300 to 1,000 years before the Common Era. Do that arithmetic, and you're looking at a gap of over 1,000 years, maybe closer to 2,000, depending on the specimen. 1,000 years. That's not a footnote. That's the entire lifespan of the Roman Empire, front to back. So ask yourself why nobody taught you this in school. The Ibaloi people of the Benguet Highlands didn't preserve their dead as a spectacle. No golden sarcophagi, no armies of tomb painters. The Ibaloi method was quiet, methodical, and startling in its sophistication. Elders approaching death drank a heavily salted liquid in their final weeks. This practice drew moisture from the tissues before death even arrived, beginning the desiccation process from the inside. After death, the body received smoke over a low fire, sometimes for weeks. Families applied herbal preparations to the skin. They positioned the body in the burial posture, knees up, arms folded, and the drying continued until the flesh became something that could outlast centuries. No priest required, no royal commission, no monumental architecture to house the result. Important, the Egyptians built an entire industry around death. Specialized embalmers, natron salt imported from specific lake beds, organ removal, linen wrapping in precise ritual sequence, canopic jars for the internal organs. The process demanded resources that only the very wealthy could afford. Mummification in Egypt was, above everything else, a statement of power. All right, the Ibaloi process needed none of that. An ordinary person, a farmer, a community elder, a respected craftsperson, could enter the afterlife with the same preserved body as any chief. The method didn't require a palace or a priesthood. It required knowledge passed through generations like any other living skill. That difference matters more than the date gap. One society built its memory of the dead into stone monuments that signaled permanence. The other folded their ancestors into mountain caves and kept them close, quiet, available for consultation. Not relics behind glass. Ancestors still present in the community's spiritual life. Here's where the story gets stranger. The preservation method the Ibaloi used produced results that in some ways rival the Egyptian techniques, despite using a fraction of the resources. Several of the Kabayan mummies retain hair, skin texture, and even fingernails. The facial features remain distinct enough that some researchers believe they can identify family resemblances between mummies stored in the same caves. The smoke-drying process, combined with the natural cold and low humidity of high-altitude caves, created conditions that modern conservation scientists find worth studying seriously. And yet, for most of the 20th century, the mummies sat in those caves largely unknown outside Benguet province, occasionally raided by grave robbers who sold pieces to collectors abroad. The Philippine government declared the Kabayan mummies a national cultural treasure in 1999. UNESCO placed the Cordillera rice terraces, built by the same ancestral communities, on its World Heritage List. Attention came slowly, and some of it came too late. Stop for a second. Think about what gets lost when a culture's written history begins only at the point of colonial contact. The Ibaloi had no writing system that survived. Their knowledge traveled through oral tradition, through ceremony, through the physical fact of the preserved bodies themselves. When Spanish colonizers moved through Luzon from the 1500s onward, the highland communities of the Cordillera resisted longer and more strongly than most. The Spanish never fully controlled the Benguet highlands. That resistance preserved the culture and the mummies. But preservation of the physical objects didn't guarantee preservation of context. The full ritual framework around the mummification practice began eroding through the colonial period and the eventual spread of Christianity into the mountains. Some of the specific knowledge of the salted drink preparation, the exact herbal treatments, and the timing of the smoking process fell out of living transmission. Researchers working in the 20th and 21st centuries pieced the method together from oral accounts collected from elderly community members, from physical analysis of the mummies themselves, and from Spanish colonial records that mentioned the practice with a mixture of fascination and disapproval. Moving on. The last confirmed traditional mummification in the Kabayan region reportedly occurred sometime in the early 20th century. The practice died out with the last practitioners who held the full technical knowledge. The mummies in the caves became separated from the living chain of understanding that created them. That's the part that should stay with you. Not the dates. The separation. Meanwhile, Egyptian mummies traveled the opposite trajectory. They went from sacred to spectacular. In the 1800s and 1900s, European collectors, museums, and wealthy tourists treated Egyptian mummies as curiosities, souvenirs, and entertainment. Unwrapping gatherings were a fashionable social event in Victorian England. Mummies were processed into paint pigment, fertilizer, and sold piecemeal. The colonial appetite for ancient Egypt turned its dead into commodities, and that very spectacle generated the global fame that made Egyptian mummies the default reference point for preserved ancient bodies. Fame built on extraction. The Kabayan mummies, locked in their mountain caves, missed that machinery entirely. And so they remained invisible to the global conversation, not because they were less significant, but because significance requires a publicity infrastructure that the Ibaloi never built and never needed. Consider the actual technical comparisons side by side. Egyptian mummification removed the organs, treated the body cavity with natron, wrapped the exterior in linen, and placed the result in a controlled tomb environment. The Ibaloi method kept the organs in place, treated the body from the inside through the salted drink, applied external preparations, used smoke drying, and relied on natural environmental conditions for the final stage. Egyptian mummies often show alteration to the body from the organ removal process. Several Kabayan mummies show remarkably intact interior preservation because that internal step never happened. Different solutions to the same problem. Both worked. One got famous. There's something vivid in that contrast, something that the mummies themselves seem to hold in their posture, sitting upright. Not lying flat like something still. Seated like someone who stepped out of a conversation and will return to it when ready. The burial position chosen by the Ibaloi isn't accidental. It mirrors the fetal position, the posture of birth, a deliberate visual argue. The idea is that death folds back into origin. The body re-enters the earth the way it entered the world. Egyptian burial iconography argues for continuation, with the deceased traveling through the underworld to reach eternal life beyond. The imagery faces forward. Ibaloi burial posture argues for return, a circle that closes on itself. The imagery folds inward. Two philosophies of time, linear and cyclical. And the preserved bodies themselves become the philosophical statement, more durable than any written text. That's the thing about a creation that outlasts its creators. The Kabayan mummies stopped belonging to any individual maker or ritual specialist the moment the last practitioner died. They became autonomous. They carry meaning now that nobody assigned them, meaning that researchers, historians, and the Ibaloi communities themselves continue to find and discuss. The mummies speak in a language that keeps acquiring new speakers. The Ibaloi elders who designed the process wanted their ancestors preserved and present. They got exactly that. They also gained, centuries later, a piece of evidence that reshapes the global timeline of human knowledge. That second result wasn't part of anyone's plan. The work exceeded the intention. The preserved bodies became proof of something larger than any individual burial. Back to that cave. The torch. The face that looks back. You walked in expecting to find something old, something finished. Instead, you found something that kept going after everyone who made it was gone. The mountains held the secret not because mountains are mystical. They held it because the colonial map never covered them completely, and gaps in maps are where the oldest things survive. Precisely survive. Wait a second. The face in the cave predates the pharaohs. It predates the pyramids. And it was made by people who left no monument to themselves other than the act of caring enough to preserve what they loved. That's not a footnote to history. That's where history started.